What's up, squad? It's your squid. This is Hume Oval in Picton, New South Wales, which you might not recognise. But I am betting you've heard of the Hume Motorway, otherwise known as the Hume Highway, right? Goes for over 800 kilometres, connects Sydney and Melbourne and some, and I want to tell you about it. Fucking flies, Jesus. Both Hume Oval and the Hume Highway are named after a bloke named Hamilton Hume. And to the uninitiated, this might seem like a random field in between Appin and Campbelltown in southeast New South Wales, or southeast Sydney. It's not quite southeast New South Wales, but you know what I mean. But to the initiated, which I am and which you're about to be, this is the site of the former home of Hamilton Hume. But why are we commemorating a site and a former home of Hamilton Hume if we don't know who Hamilton Hume is? Hume and Hovell went on an expedition in 24, let me check. 2nd of October 1824, went on an expedition. They left from this very spot, and I want to tell you about that expedition. In short, the Hume Highway follows the path that the Hume and Hovell expedition went along about 100 years before it was built. The long version of that story is far more interesting though, and I've written something out for you, so enjoy the next little montage of native Australian animals while I read it to you. If you're in the area, if you're ever near Appin, come and check out this monument. It's in between nowhere and fucking nowhere. The joint expedition undertaken by Hamilton Hume and William Hovell in 1824 from Appin to the shores of Port Phillip Bay near present-day Geelong is one of the most transformative events in the early Australian colonial history. This journey, undertaken at the behest of Governor Brisbane, sought to address one of the most pressing challenges faced by the colonies at the time, finding a viable overland route to the south that could connect the colony of New South Wales with the fertile, yet largely unexplored lands to the west and south. While the expedition itself was a tale of endurance, exploration and compromise, its results reshaped the colonial economy, infrastructure and understanding of the Australian landscape. But let's zoom out and dive into some context first. In 1824, the colony of New South Wales was in a state of expansion, but remained hemmed in by its geography. Settlement was largely confined to the fertile areas around Sydney, the Hunter Valley and the Bathurst Plains, but beyond these regions lay uncharted territory, often described as terra incognita. While coastal exploration by sea had revealed the existence of fertile southern lands, including the areas around Port Phillip Bay, no reliable overland routes connected these locations to Sydney. The lack of overland connectivity limited the colony's economic and territorial ambitions. Settlement needed more arable land for agriculture, which was crucial to supporting its growing population, both free settlers and convicts. The potential of the southern regions, as reported by coastal explorers, promised fertile soils and better pastures. However, without an overland route, colonists were forced to rely on long, costly and dangerous sea voyages to reach these lands. Furthermore, there was little understanding of the geography, rivers and terrain between Sydney and the southern coasts. Hume and Hovell's expedition was commissioned to bridge this gap. Hamilton Hume was an actual Australian rather than a Scot or an Englishman, and by that I mean he was one of our first explorers who was born here to European parents. He wasn't Aboriginal. Regardless, he had an intimate knowledge of the bush because of growing up here, as well as the skills needed for such an arduous journey. William Hovell, a retired sea captain, brought navigational expertise, supposedly. Despite their initial disagreements over leadership and planning, the two men, along with a small team, departed from Hume's property near Appin in October 1824. Their goal was clear: find a practical route south to the coast. Prior to the expedition, New South Wales was effectively isolated from its southern and western frontiers. This isolation was more than just geographical. It reflected a lack of knowledge about the interior of the continent and a fear of its harsh, unfamiliar landscapes. The colonial economy was primarily based on agriculture, and settlers were beginning to exhaust the arable lands near Sydney. The Blue Mountains had only been crossed in 1813, opening up the Bathurst region, but the lack of further exploration meant there was no systematic expansion strategy. Aboriginal Australians, who had lived on and managed these lands for tens of thousands of years, faced increasing displacement as European settlers pushed outward. However, large swaths of the land remained under their stewardship, particularly in the south and west, where colonial influence had yet to reach. This meant that areas like the future Port Phillip district were largely unaffected by European settlement at this time before the expedition. Moreover, the colony's transport and trade networks were still in their infancy. Without significant inland routes, Sydney relied heavily on sea transport for communication and trade, which was both inefficient and risky given the unsurveyed coastline and primitive navigation technologies of the time. Establishing a reliable overland connection to southern Australia was seen as critical to addressing these limitations. Hume and Hovell's journey south was fraught with challenges. The expedition party carried their provisions in 2 wooden carts drawn by bullocks. A bullock is a young bull that's been castrated, by the way, and they frequently encountered rugged terrain, including dense forests, swollen rivers, and steep ridges. Their initial disagreements over navigation equipment and the best route continued throughout the journey. Hovell's insistence on using his inaccurate and effectively useless chronometer often conflicted with Hume's bush instincts, leading to disputes over their position and their direction. Despite these difficulties, the expedition successfully reached the northern shores of Port Phillip Bay on December 16, 1824. Along the way, they encountered numerous Aboriginal groups whose knowledge and assistance were invaluable. These interactions also foreshadowed the significant cultural and territorial upheavals that would occur in the wake of the expedition's success. It's probably not a stretch to say many of the Aboriginals who helped Hume and Hovell would later come to regret it. The return journey was equally arduous, but proved a specific point about the feasibility of the overland route. It could be done in either direction. By early 1825, the expedition was back in Sydney, and their reports of fertile plains, navigable rivers, and abundant resources confirmed the potential of southern lands for settlement and development. The immediate impact of Hume and Hovell's expedition was the opening of the overland route between Sydney and the Port Phillip district, an area that would later become Victoria, specifically Geelong. Their reports attracted the attention of settlers and government officials alike, sparking interest in expanding into the newly surveyed regions. Hume and Hovell's descriptions of fertile lands and ample water supplies convinced many settlers of the potential for agricultural development in the south. Over the next 2 decades, this region became a focal point for pastoral expansion. Squatters who were granted licences to graze livestock on unoccupied Crown land quickly moved into the areas around what would become Albury, Wodonga and Geelong. This expansion created new economic opportunities and significantly boosted wool production, which became the backbone of Australia's colonial economy. And it's at this point that I'll probably lose some of you, but I am going to say it all anyway, in the interests of truth-telling and Makarrata. While the expedition opened new opportunities for settlers, it also marked the beginning of profound changes for the Aboriginal peoples of the southern regions. The Port Phillip district, once largely free from European intrusion, became a site of rapid colonisation. Indigenous groups such as the Wathaurong, Guntchamurra and others faced the dispossession of their lands, the introduction of foreign diseases, and violent conflicts with settlers. The changes wrought by Hume and Hovell's journey were transformative, but often devastating for the region's Aboriginal populations. There's no clear historical record indicating that Hamilton Hume or William Hovell themselves individually physically harmed any Aboriginal people during their 1824 expedition. Quite the opposite, in fact. There's documented evidence that the expedition did involve interactions with Aboriginal groups, and accounts suggest that Hume in particular showed respect and understanding of Aboriginal culture, which he'd gained from his upbringing near Aboriginal communities. These interactions were reportedly non-violent and sometimes cooperative, with local groups offering guidance or information on nearby water sources. However, with that being said, it's crucial to understand the broader context at play. While Hume and Hovell may not have directly harmed Aboriginal persons or people individually themselves, their exploration opened the way for settlers to move into these regions. This ultimately led to the displacement, dispossession and violence that Aboriginal peoples experienced as European settlement expanded. These consequences were an indirect but significant result of their journey south. The expedition's long-term significance lies in its role in shaping the economic and political landscape of Australia. By connecting Sydney to the fertile southern regions, Hume and Hovell laid out the foundation for what would become the most important economic corridor in the country. The overland route pioneered by Hume and Hovell eventually became the basis for the Hume Highway, which, as you saw earlier, remains the primary road between Sydney and Melbourne. This connection not only facilitated trade, but also fostered social and political ties between the colonies. By the mid-19th century, this corridor had become central to Australia's economic development, supporting the growth of cities, industries and transportation networks. The expedition also directly influenced the establishment of the Port Phillip district as a separate colony. By the 1830s, settlers such as John Batman and John Pascoe Fawkner were establishing permanent settlements around Port Phillip Bay, including the future city of Melbourne. These developments culminated in the formal creation of the colony of Victoria in 1851, with Melbourne emerging as its capital and a major economic hub. The fertile lands identified by Hume and Hovell became central to Australia's wool industry, which dominated the colonial economy throughout the 19th century. The vast pastoral stations established in the wake of the expedition produced wool that was exported to Britain and other markets, earning Australia its reputation for hard work at the time. So in conclusion, Hamilton Hume and William Hovell's expedition from Appin to Port Phillip Bay and back was a pivotal moment in Australian history. It bridged the gap between the known and the unknown, connecting Sydney to the fertile southern lands and paving the way for economic growth, infrastructure development and the eventual establishment of the colony of Victoria. However, this progress came at a significant cost to the Aboriginal peoples of the region, whose lives and lands were irrevocably altered by the expansion of European settlement. The legacy of the expedition is a tale of transformation, of a colony moving toward its economic and territorial potential, but also of the profound changes wrought upon the land and its original custodians. The route pioneered by Hume and Hovell remains a critical trade route in modern Australia, symbolising both the achievements and the complexities of the colonial past. Anyway, that's one more video for the history playlist. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you feel like you learnt something, feel free to give me $1. I like money. Turning some of your money into mine on a monthly basis would be ideal. These guys give me money on a monthly basis, at least $1. Some of them way more than $1. Your name could be on that list too. I'd appreciate it if it was. The links are all in the description. But yeah, leave a comment, hit the like button. If you learnt something, maybe just share this link with a friend or whatever. I'll see you when I look at you. You'll see me when you look at me. Thanks so much for watching.